Can you all hear me back there? Yeah. You're going to be able to tell in about 10 seconds I'm from Texas, or at least that I live there. I'm actually a gypsy from everywhere. So my name's Ray Hoffman. I normally speak at marketing conferences. I'm the CEO of a national marketing company called Pushfire, and we do digital marketing. And normally I speak on the topic of reverse engineering search algorithms. And I've spoken a couple of times on this type of topic. It's the first time that I'm actually speaking to another room of parents. So normally I'm speaking to business owners, in general. I'm kind of explaining to them what I've learned by being the parent of a special needs child, and how I've applied that to all aspects of my life. So the one thing I want to let you guys know is that I'm actually very glad to be here talking to you guys. I think I'm very glad that they found me on the computer, so that I'm able to kind of hopefully inspire some people in this room to take this as the opportunity that it is. So this is 11 things that I learned along the way. I'm a mom to 4 kids. My oldest son had a massive bilateral stroke when he was 2 weeks old. The cause is unknown. It damaged over 80% of his brain, and he was severely physically and mentally handicapped his entire life as a result. On November 29th, 2012, he passed away at the age of 15 from pneumonia due to all the complications he got as a result of his initial stroke. And that kind of made me look back on all the stuff that I had learned from him. And it's amazing that he never said a word in his entire life, but the things that he taught me and the ripple effect that he had on the world around him was huge. So I'm going to go through some of the stuff that I learned as a result of that. So number 11 is not everything will go according to plan. How many people in this room already know that? So it's, you have a child. I was 21 years old when I had my son, and I had a perfectly healthy baby boy. And I had hoped that, he would look like his dad, because his dad was pretty good looking. And I kind of knew, he was going to have my mouth and my street smarts, so I was kind of prepared for that. And you kind of imagine, are they going to play football? Are they going to play soccer? Are they going to play baseball? And you kind of have this plan for them. You don't know exactly what it is, but you have this plan that they're going to grow up happy and healthy and that they're going to do awesome things. And then in one instance, everything in my life and in his life changed. And I know that everybody in here has a story, but I'm going to take you back to mine a little bit. And so when my son was 2 weeks old, I woke up one morning and it was 7 o'clock in the morning. And that instantaneously set off alarm bells in my head, because even though he was my first child, I was pretty sure a 2-week-old did not sleep through the night. And he hadn't woken me up at all. And I looked at his bassinet, which was next to my bed, and it was literally rocking back and forth. So I went over and I looked at him, and he's doing this thing with his arm, right? And his arm just keeps, it was weird. It almost looked like he was trying to punch himself in the face, but wasn't quite, making it all the way to his face. And so I immediately called his pediatrician. And he had been acting weird for a few days. So I'd actually called the pediatrician a few times in the preceding days. And so I said to my then husband, I said, I think this guy thinks I'm nuts. I was like, so can you call him and let him know what he's doing and see what he says? So my then husband called the pediatrician, and the pediatrician very nicely told my then husband that I had new mom syndrome and that I needed to realize nothing was wrong with my child and to stop calling him. And that if my son was still doing it in a few hours, to go ahead and take him to the hospital. So screw that. He definitely was not acting right. So I took him to the hospital. And of course, anybody that has a special needs child, that sometimes your kid will do something and you take them to the doctor and then they don't do it. So right before we walk through the hospital door, he stops. So there I am in the ER, and they've run all their blood tests and everything else, and we're kind of sitting in a hospital room. And they call the pediatrician, and the pediatrician is like, this girl is crazy. So they kind of just leave us sitting there waiting for the blood work and the tests to come back. And all of a sudden he starts doing it again. So I walk out into the hallway, and it was a male nurse, and I said, he's doing that thing again. I'm not crazy, you should come look. And he comes back in. He takes one look at my son and turns sheet white. He runs out into the hallway, and I hear them calling a code white over the loudspeaker, which is essentially medical emergency. It's almost the same thing as like a code blue, but it's for children instead of adults. And so people, storm the room, and they let us know that that movement was actually seizures. And so he had been having them all day long until they noticed them. And so they basically told us that they needed to give him medication to stop the seizures, but that the medication that they were going to give him had the chance of making him stop breathing. And as a local hospital in a town that was population 13,000, they did not have the equipment there to really be able to do that. And because he was seizing, he couldn't be Bayflighted. So the nearest children's hospital was an hour and a half away, so they were sending an ambulance to come get him from our local hospital. And so they came in, and they put him in the incubator, and they tell us only one person can go in the ambulance to the children's hospital. And I'm really glad anybody didn't get in front of me, because I probably would have had assault charges if they hadn't let me on the ambulance. So we go down to St. Pete, and the entire hour and a half, they're trying to stabilize him. He's still doing the thing with his arm the whole way. And we get to the children's hospital, and I mean, it looks like a scene out of ER. They open up the ambulance, they pull out the incubator thing, and they take off running. And I'm running behind them, and they go into the MICU. So if your child, no matter how little your child is, if your child has left the hospital, they don't consider them neonatal anymore. So even if they were 1 day old, if they went home, once they come back in, they're treated like a regular patient. And so they take him into this MICU, and there's this dude in there, like jeans and a tank top, and he's like ordering people around. I'm thinking, who is this random guy, telling everybody what to do with my son? And it turned out he was a pediatric neurologist. And so they came up to us and they said, we've got to give him this medication. There's a likelihood that the medication's going to make him stop breathing, but we're prepared for it. But there is a chance that you're going to get a call that he is on life support at some point in time. And within 24 hours, we got that call. He remained on life support for 2 weeks, and they had told us that he just had a seizure disorder. And at the time it wasn't just, it was like, oh my God, that was the worst thing that ever could have happened. He's got a seizure disorder when he's 12, he's gonna be in his own school classroom, he's gonna flop on the ground, he's gonna shake, all the kids are gonna make fun of him. We were just devastated by that. But they said, he was going to have to probably be on this medication for the rest of his life, because they didn't know what was causing the seizures. And if they didn't know what was causing it, they couldn't stop it. And so we were in the hospital. He came off life support after 2 weeks, and we were in the hospital for about 5 weeks. And they let us know that they were going to be sending us home. And he had had a large hematoma on his head since he was born. And I had always had a bad feeling about that thing. And so they had told us that if it didn't go away on its own, it might need to be drained. And so here they are, they're telling us they're going to send us home, and I swear this hematoma is getting bigger, even though they swore to me it wasn't. And I said, look, I've been in here for 5 weeks. I am not going home and coming back because of this hematoma. I said, so you guys need to check it out and do whatever it is you're going to do so that I can go home and hopefully never have to see any of you people again. And they did an MRI to check the hematoma, and we got a phone call at Ronald McDonald House, which was where we were staying because we had been there for so long. And they said, you need to come up to the hospital. We know why he has the brain damage, why he has the seizures. And we're like, fantastic. So, we go up to the hospital because they had told us they could probably stop the seizures if they could figure out why he was having them. And so we got to the hospital, and they informed us that he had severe brain damage on both sides of his head. It took them about 24 hours to figure out that he had had an ischemic bilateral stroke. So he got a clot in his main artery in his neck, and it cut off blood flow to both sides of his brain. So a bilateral stroke, by the way, is less than 0.5% of all strokes, adults included, are bilateral. So he essentially won the lottery in a really bad thing. And so it was, they sat there and they told us something that, I know we've all heard to different severities, right? But they give you this diagnosis and you're thinking, well, it can't be as bad as they say it's gonna be. We met with the neurologist and I will never forget, he put up the CAT scan and he said, there's a very clear difference between live brain and damaged brain. And he goes, so you can see the areas that are affected. And I said, yeah, all the little white spots. And he said, no, that's what's left. And so, we asked, is he gonna walk? And the doctor said, in my professional opinion, no. And we asked if he was gonna talk. I don't know why, but I asked if he was gonna throw a football. And then it kind of like swept over me and I went, is he going to be potty trained? And the doctor said, in my professional opinion, no. And so you're kind of left with this. It's like being hit in the face by a 2x4. You didn't expect it, and you go into this scenario of, this isn't how life was supposed to be. Like, this is not supposed to happen to me. I know it's happened to other people, but this is not supposed to happen to me. And one of the things that I've learned is that the ability to live a good life, you have to let go of what you planned for life to be. You have to be able to adapt to the situation that you're dealt, and I'm not saying that it's fair, and I'm not saying that you have to like it, but you have to be willing to let go of what was supposed to be and accept that there's a new reality, and accept that there is a new path that you're going to walk, and there's a new role that you have to fulfill, and that there is a new outcome that your child is going to experience. So for me, the biggest part was being able to let go of that, because if I hadn't, I would have sat around for the rest of my life going, this is not fair, this is not how it was supposed to be. But the bottom line is that I can't change that it happened. So the only thing that I can do from that point is move forward, and that's the only thing all of us can do from the moment that we find out that this is our new reality, is learn to adapt to a new reality. And that brings me to complaining changes nothing, action changes everything. So the first thing you think when your child's diagnosed with whatever it is why him or why her? What did they do? They're just a baby, or they're just a child, or they're just a teenager. They don't deserve this. They didn't do anything for this. And then I think the second instinct, which is the one a lot of us don't like to admit to, because I think that it makes us feel like we're being selfish, or it's not something that we're allowed to feel. The next one is, why me? Like, what did I do? That it feels like you're being punished, like you did something, and your child's having to pay for it, and you don't understand why this is happening to you. And as I said, the cause for my son's stroke was unknown. They gave him every test they had 16 years ago, and they couldn't figure out why he had it. But one of the things that I realized was it didn't matter why. Why was not going to change his situation. Why was not going to fix the brain damage. For everybody in this room, knowing why, don't get me wrong, there's an aspect of it, if it's genetic and it's something that could happen to more kids, obviously that's a why you would like to know. But the general why of why this is happening to you and why this is happening to your child is something that doesn't matter. And the one thing that I'm a really big believer in is that complaining about your situation makes you a victim. And I don't want to be a victim. Acting puts you back in control. And you do have a choice. You have a choice on how you choose to take this news. You have a choice in how you choose to move forward. For me, they had told me when my son had a stroke that I would never meet another parent whose child had a bilateral stroke. And this was 1997, so the internet was not what it is today. And so I needed an outlet to kind of give his story, and so I made this little tiny web page online, and I called it CJ's Story. And it was basically a listing of, he had the stroke, what happened in the hospital, everything that I just told you guys. And I started getting these emails from other parents, and they were like, hey, my kid had a stroke, not bilateral, but my kid had a stroke. And First it was one parent, and then it was 5, and then it was 10. And what I had no idea of at the time was there were things out there called search engines. And so they had found my page, and because there was hardly any information at the time on pediatric stroke, when people would type in pediatric stroke after their child was diagnosed, they were coming along and finding my page. Long story short, I ended up accidentally founding the first international support group for parents and families of pediatric stroke survivors to ever register with the American Heart Association when I was 22. And so we had over 5,000 families come through the group. We got pediatric stroke national media coverage. It was featured in everything from USA Today to Good Morning America. We kind of acted like a hub. You know, the media agencies would call us and say, hey, you know, we're looking for 13-year-olds that have overcome the stroke. And we would go through our parents and say, you know, who wants to be on Good Morning America that fits this criteria? The National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke used us to fund their research, and not monetarily. But they contact us and say, you know, we're looking for kids that are between 10 and 12 whose stroke happened at least 2 years ago, and their stroke happened as a result of moya moya. And so we were able to hook them up with parents in order to be able to do studies. I ended up stepping down as the director of the group in 2001 because I had a lot more stuff to focus on, and another parent took it over. But if I had just sat around and complained that like I felt alone and there were no other parents out there that I was ever going to meet that, you know, had a child that had the problems that my child had, I wouldn't have started this support group, even if it was accidentally. And there would be 5,000 families out there. You know, there were so many friendships, and you guys know this, I'm sure, from going to support groups here and things along those lines, that you just create the most invaluable friendships that at times keep you going. And so if you're really busy complaining and you're not busy acting, then you're not going to find those opportunities. So I encourage you that when you get this type of news, you know, after you bury your head in a pillow on your bed and punch the bed until you can't hit it anymore, it is okay to feel it. Do not get me wrong, but you kind of need to have that stop time of, okay, I've felt it, I've accepted it, now it's time to move on and start acting instead of complaining as to why this has happened to me. So for me, this is a big one. When I speak business-wise, you know, I'll have people that'll come up to me and they'll go, oh, you know, I wish I could get to where you are, but excuse. You know, this happened to me when I was 9, or, you know, I'm in this situation, or I don't have any money, or I don't have any education. I was in the foster care system by the time that I was 13. I graduated from the foster care system. I had nothing but a GED. I still have nothing but a GED. If Florida didn't require you to have a GED to get your driver's license before you were 18, I still wouldn't have a GED. So it's, I was married at 19, because that's what you did in a town of 13,000. And by the time I was 21, I had a severely multiply handicapped child. If I had sat at home and ate bonbons and watched Maury all day, there's nobody that would have blamed me, right? Like, I had a crappy situation. I shouldn't be where I am. And I remember that when CJ was first diagnosed, you know, and we needed like a $300 bath chair. And that might as well have been $300,000. You know, we couldn't keep our electric bill on, much less come up with $300 for a bath chair. And I remember sitting out on the front porch of my house, and I put it in quotes because it's like, it wasn't a mobile home, but it looked just like one, except that it was actually on concrete. And I was sitting out in front of the house, and they had just shut our electric bill off for like the 90th time. And I remember looking and going, you know, this is not what I want. Like, this is not how I want life to be. This isn't how I want life to be for me. This isn't how I want life to be for him. And I kind of made the decision that I was going to do whatever I had to do to ensure that he would have the best life possible. And that came from the aspect of getting involved and trying to change the way that things were done. And that came from the aspect of just trying to improve our lives in general, to put us in a situation where we could give him opportunities. And so I'm a big believer, and I get that this is like a hot button for me, because I don't care if you had a bad upbringing, I don't care if you're divorced, I don't care if you're a single parent. I was a single mom for 7 years. You have the choice, again, on how you're going to handle this and how you're going to move forward. And if things aren't where you want them to be, you need to look in the mirror and go, self, it's done. Like, we need to move forward, and we need to advocate, and we need to get involved in the special needs community. And if the government is screwing us, as they usually try and do, by not paying for benefits, or you're in that horrible situation where you're middle class and don't qualify for anything, it's basically, you've got to realize that nobody else is going to do it for you. The groups that are sponsoring this right now, they can lead you to it. They can tell you what office to go to complain, and they can lead you to the resources, but you guys have to make the decision to actually do it. So I want you guys to understand that whatever your situation, it doesn't determine where you're going to be in 5 years. And so I really like this quote, because I think we all get angry, and I wish that there was a person named disability who I could just punch in the face repeatedly. And it's hard because you don't have anybody to take this out on. There is no physical thing to blame. And so I'm a big believer in, take that anger and channel it. Channel it into changing your child's life, into changing the lives of other children, into helping other parents, and look for answers to your problems rather than just accepting them and coming up with an excuse as to why that's just the way it is. Because again, and this actually typically, I try to tone this down for you guys. This actually normally uses another word, but I chose to make it a little bit more politically correct. So just keep that in mind, that everybody has their challenges. And if I hadn't focused on finding solutions, I wouldn't have fell into my career. And it's a really long story, but the only reason that I run a marketing agency right now is because I was looking for solutions and to help other people with pediatric stroke. So you'd be surprised too that when you put good things out, that good things tend to come back to you. In the 15 years that my son was on this earth, he never said anything. He had profound mental retardation, so he didn't even realize there was anything to say for the most part. And it's amazing that even though he never said a word, that he had this huge ripple effect on everything around him. This is a quote by Mark Twain, and it says, "The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why." And so I believe that there's a reason that, my son had to go through what he had to go through, and I don't think it's a fair reason. But I do think that his struggle and what he went through has had a ripple effect on the world around him, as far as I do fundraising for the American Heart Association, which is the parent organization of the American Stroke Association. And I do fundraising for their walks. And again, as a result of me taking action and falling into my career, I'm now, I have a lot of visibility in social media in the business world. And so I do this walk every year, and I personally, through all the stuff that I do online, my son's life has resulted in over $50,000 being donated to the AHA in his name, to try and prevent other people from having to go through this. I have been involved with tons of local groups to try, and I lived in Florida when my son had his stroke. It's like one of the worst states that you can live in as far as having, a severely special needs child. So I joined the local parent groups. I did my best to try and advocate to change things for us, for the people that were going to come after us. And it's responsible for me being here and being able to talk to you guys. And if you guys take away something from this and you hand it to somebody else, that's all his ripple effect coming through life. As far as falling into my career, I've helped train multiple people, and all of those people have him to thank for the fact that I even do what I do, to help train them. That's pretty much how he took life. He smiled. I did not have to dig through a bunch of, don't get me wrong, he didn't smile all the time. But he smiled most of the time. And so it's kind of like, if anybody had a reason to just be miserable, it would have been him, but he wasn't miserable. He found reasons to smile. And I think that, anytime it was too tough for us, anytime that we were just like, you go to bed, you finally get him to bed at 1 a.m. and he's up again at 4:30, and because he's technically legally blind, the room's completely dark, everything's quiet, so he cries for stimulation, which means I'm up at 4:30 in the morning. And anytime, that would happen, it was just like, oh, I can't do this anymore. We would look at the way that he would handle it and look at the way that he went through life and go, you know what, this isn't even happening to me. Like, yeah, I have to deal with it, but I'm not the one who gets 12 IVs put in every time I'm in the hospital for 14 days because I blow the IVs every 36 hours. We just kind of looked at it like him, despite the fact that he wasn't able to say anything, who he was greater than anything he ever could have said. And for everybody that's in this room, especially for those with kids that do understand what's going on around them, how you guys handle it gives them their cue on how they're supposed to handle it. So the more positive that you are, the more, I'm trying to think, the more, not positive, but the more, good Lord, I'm sorry, but the more that you think they can achieve, the more positive that you are, your kids are going to take that from you. So make sure that you understand that you're not only trying to keep yourself in a good mindset, but that the kids that do understand are going to take it from you. And frankly, even though my son didn't understand, he could feel vibes around him. I truly believe that if we were in a bad mood, he was in a bad mood. So even if they don't understand, they do by instinct understand. It's kind of like, you ever had a friend that just is not comfortable around babies, and you try and hand them a baby and the baby starts screaming bloody murder because the baby knows they don't want to hold him. And so I think that the kids that don't understand feel the same way. So you'll never know what you're capable of until you try. It was interesting. I was overhearing a conversation, and I won't point anybody out, but when I was outside, I overheard a conversation of somebody saying that they were going to a local here, learning center, right? And all these people knew so much, and he said, I'm just a parent, so that when he goes there, he feels like he doesn't want to tell them how to do things because he's just a parent. And it's kind of like, you guys are never going to know, nobody might will, what you're capable of until you try. Like I said, I was a 21-year-old kid with a severely handicapped kid. I was a waitress with a GED. If you had told me 15 years ago that I'd be the CEO of a marketing agency, I'd have laughed my ass off at you. But the thing is that when you have a special needs child, it kind of teaches you that, you have nothing to lose. What did I have to lose? I didn't have anything to lose. Life was already somewhat crappy. So it was kind of like, you know, and whether that trying be to start a business, to be, you know, in a financial situation, to get a better job, to, you know, make more awareness for whatever disability it is that your child has, or to try and improve the government systems that unfortunately a lot of us have to be reliant on. You know, you don't have anything to lose. Try. Don't psych yourself out and say, you know, well, I'm just a parent, or I don't know everything that these people know. There is a line by Eminem, and he said, success is my only bleep bleep option, failure's not. And I've kind of taken that to heart, that it's kind of like, just take the mindset that you can do it. You can help change the programs, or you can advocate to get your child better services. Don't be afraid to try. And so this is a quote by Will Smith. So Will Smith, I'm sure everybody in here can probably recite the theme song to The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. But he's actually a really smart dude when it comes to business. And he came from very humble means, you know, street kid from Philadelphia. And now he's, you know, one of the most successful guys in show business. And I watched an interview where he was talking about entrepreneurship. And he said this quote, he said, "The only thing that I see that is distinctly different about me is I am not afraid to die on a treadmill." And his reason for saying that was that you could challenge him, that you could outrun him on a treadmill. And you might be able to outrun him on that treadmill, but he would die, fall down, and the treadmill would slide him off the back before he would give up. And I think that that's a big thing, that we all get to that spot where it's just like things aren't going our way. You know, we finally see a light and it's like, oh, but then there's a medical setback, you're in the hospital, you were just almost getting caught up on your bills, and now your husband had to take a week off work because, you know, your kid was sick in the hospital, and now it's just worse than it was 3 weeks ago, and it's just never gonna end, I give up. And you have to be aware that that is basically life challenging you to keep you moving forward. And again, I'm not saying it's fair, but don't ever give up, and don't be afraid to go after what you want, whether it be in your personal life, in your child's medical life, in your child's school life. Speak up, and don't feel like you don't have the knowledge to, or you don't have the right to, because you'll never know what you're capable of until you try. So other people's opinions don't matter. I will tell you that over the last 16 years, I have met some good people, like some really good people. You know, and I think the people that have run this and brought you guys in here today are really good people. I can't speak for everybody in the room because I haven't talked to all of you yet, but I would hope everybody's good people. And then there's jackasses. And unfortunately, I have met a lot of them. Over the years, and you know, I will never forget that I was standing in a Walmart at a Walmart supercenter at the deli counter, and I have my son with me, and he's probably about 4, you know, and he's in his wheelchair, and he had a G-tube, and we couldn't bulk feed him through the G-tube, so he's on like the feeding pump, so it's like his wheelchair, the pole, the bag of food, and you know, it's going down the tube into him. And this lady, like, no lie, just looks over at her husband and says, like, loud enough that I can hear, "Can you believe she brought him in here?" And I'm thinking, bad words, like, lots of bad words. You know, and there are unfortunately people out there like that. And I wish I could say that incident was, you know, isolated, but unfortunately it's not. You know, I had a guy at Ronald McDonald House, Ronald McDonald House, like, come on, we're all there. He was there because his daughter was in a car accident. So, you know, there was nothing wrong with her. She had just been in a car accident. And so, you know, we're sitting outside, and the parents always exchange stories of, like, you know, what everybody's doing there. And I gave my story, and the guy looks at me and he says, "I feel so sorry for you. I wouldn't want no retarded child." And I just kind of like, now he said it in those exact words, so that may give you some insight into his intelligence level. But I just sat there flabbergasted because it was just, we're in Ronald McDonald House. Like, you cannot seriously, and I will say to Ronald McDonald's House credit, and I don't know why I felt bad about it, but I did. One of the other parents overheard this and went and told the staff at Ronald McDonald House, and they politely requested that that family find a hotel to stay in. So, you know, the one thing that you learn is that, you know, everybody is kind of like, it's ingrained in you to not want to be embarrassed, right? And once you have a special needs child, that kind of goes out the window, because you are like, you know, I was talking to somebody earlier and they said, you know, their son likes to walk up to people and smell people. He doesn't mean anything by it, you know, and for me, I'd be standing in the middle of the mall and my son would projectile vomit into the hall, into like, you know, the hall that we're sitting in. And so it's kind of like, you're kind of forced to learn to let go of embarrassment. And if you can kind of embrace that, then you can realize that, like, other people's opinions do not matter. Whether it be the general public, you know, I tell people all the time that if they don't sit around your Thanksgiving table, then what they think of you or your child does not matter. And the same thing too, as far as other people's opinions don't matter, that goes the same for the medical professionals that you deal with. And hear me out here. When you first have a child, like, you know, that has special needs, you assume the doctors know everything. They're doctors. So, you know, whatever the doctor says must be right. And, you know, I will never forget that they wanted to put a feeding tube in my son when he was 6 weeks old after they found out about the brain damage. And I'm like, okay. You know, the doctor said that it needs to be done, and I went back to Ronald McDonald House, and, you know, I told one of the other moms they were getting ready to put a permanent feeding tube in him. And she goes, well, doesn't he still drink from a bottle? And I said, yeah. And she goes, I said, but they said that he'll eventually stop. And she goes, then put it in when he stops. And I went, I can do that? Like, I didn't know that I could tell a doctor no, that I didn't think his choice was the necessarily the best choice. You know, and I had, is anybody in here under the age of 25, or did you start this whole journey before you turned 25? Yeah. So one of the things that you probably experience, or you know, maybe this is known to me, but you're young, right? So it's like, as regular parents, we have a hard enough time getting the doctors to accept the fact that maybe we know a little something. When you're young, I think that they automatically look at you with this, you know, you're just going to listen to what I say. And I had one particular doctor that I went in, and my mom happened to be with me, and the doctor started talking to my mom. Like, the whole conversation was directed at my mom, and my mom stopped him like 2 minutes in and goes, whoa, I have no idea what you're talking about. She goes, you're going to need to talk to her. And he kind of turned like, but she's a kid, and I'm thinking, but I'm his mom. My mom has no idea what you were saying. And so I think, you know, that was something else, was just having doctors challenge me, not only because I was a parent, but because I was a kid. And so I think it's important to realize that other people's opinions don't matter. This is pretty much what I think of them, and this is pretty much what I think of anything that they have to think about my son. And I actually use the full word when I'm talking to somebody, because, you know, when you first start hearing the jackass comments, you kind of just, you know, let them go. Boy, you get 10 years in and you're just like, excuse me, what'd you say? Would you like to repeat that a little bit louder into my face? So just keep in mind that, you know, other people's opinions don't matter, and let go of the embarrassment, because I promise you, if you're at the beginning of your journey, you're gonna have to let go of it anyway, so just speed up the process. So, I apologize, I have notes here. So you can't change the past, but you can help shape the future. There is no way you can go backwards in time. That's for any aspect of your life. But my son's stroke, it's his stroke. It's done. He's got brain damage. There's no fixing it. You know, maybe in 30 years, hell, what they're doing with technology today, like, I hope that some of the people in this room hit a point where there is a cure for whatever it is that your child is dealing with. But I basically feel like you cannot go back, and because of that, all you can really do is focus on changing the future. And this quote actually comes from somebody that's unknown, so I don't know who said it, but the road to happiness is dotted with many tempting parking spaces. Then excuses is one of them, and we've already discussed excuses at length. Fear is another one of those. Just being scared that it's not going to work out. I mean, as parents of special needs children, we deal with fears that other parents just don't have to deal with. We've got to worry about, is our child going to be self-sufficient when they're an adult? What happens if we die before them? Who's going to take care of them? Where are they going to end up? What if, in the cases of children that are severely physically impaired, what happens when they get too big for you to lift? And I think we deal with a lot of fear on a regular basis, and I think the big thing is you can't park in that parking spot. You can't allow the fears of what may come to prevent you from doing what might be there now, what might need to be done now. Like I said, when my son was diagnosed, one of my first questions was, is he going to be potty trained? And there he is, 2 weeks old, like he's going to be in diapers anyway for the next 2.5 years. And I'm like freaking out over how I'm going to change a 7-year-old's diaper. And it's kind of like, you get there. You just take it one day at a time, and eventually you get to 7, and it doesn't even seem weird because you did it all the way up until you got there. So don't let the fear take over you, and don't stop wherever it is that fear wants you to stop. Assumption is another big one. Assuming that life's going to suck, assuming that your child's life is going to suck, assuming that you're never going to have anything, assuming that it's never going to get any better. There are tons of things that you can assume, and the majority of them are wrong. They say that we spend like 99% of our lives worrying about things that have like a 1% chance of happening. So don't assume things, and don't let things that may creep in, assumptions that may creep into your head, dictate where you go. And then acceptance, and I need to clarify this, because I'm telling you acceptance is a bad parking space, and you're going, people need to accept it, like that's how you move on. And so there are two different types of acceptance in my head. There is the acceptance that you have a special needs child, and that this is life from this point going forward, and kind of just going, I accept this is a new reality, I'm going to move forward. And then there's the acceptance that life is going to suck, or that you're never going to have what you want. Basically, all of those assumptions, but accepting them as fact. And that's the type of acceptance that I don't want you guys to experience. So accept your situation, but don't accept what you may fear the results are already going to be. And so I always tell everybody to drive your attitude, to drive your cause, and to drive your life. And in addition to not parking in crappy parking spaces, don't let other people drive you around in a bus either. You guys cannot let everybody else make decisions for you. This is your life, this is your child's life. There is a reason that we have something called a mother's instinct or a father's instinct. Don't let other people tell you where it is you're supposed to go, except if it's a positive one, like I'm telling you all where you're supposed to go. But if it's positive, kind of take it in. But this is your life, and at the end, you guys are who are going to have to live with all the decisions that were made. So you guys need to make them yourselves. You guys need to decide where it is that you're going to take yourself and to take your children and to take the laws that are surrounding you. Also, the other thing too, as far as with acceptance, don't accept either the crappy situation that the government puts us in. As far as, and I was talking to somebody about this last night, but it's almost a double whammy, because it's like you're dealing with the fact that your child has some type of special need, no matter how severe it is, and then the government's like, oh, and guess what? You're gonna have to be poor to qualify for anything for the rest of your life. And I don't know about New Hampshire, but in Florida, I couldn't have savings accounts for my other kids because it was considered income. My in-laws couldn't give me $200 for groceries, but they could go buy me groceries and bring them to my house. Don't accept the things that the government tries to do if you see an issue with them. You know, you guys are a large group right here, and if you guys use your mouth and use your words and make pretty signs, you know, you can create a lot of havoc where there should be havoc. You know, 50 years ago, my son, 50 years ago, a doctor with somebody in my situation would have told me to put my son in a home and go about my life. I mean, that's how short ago that was occurring. And there were a group of parents that said, you know what, no, that's not how I'm gonna handle it. And I know that that's the status quo and that's the way we've been handling it and that's the way you feel is best to handle it, but I'm not going to handle it that way. And because those parents stood up, you know, first, I believe the first woman, I apologize, I can't remember her name, but I know her son had Down syndrome. And so she was one of the more notable ones that basically fought because she said no and they said, you have no choice. And she said, oh, hell if I don't. So it's like, you know, she stood up and then another parent stood up and then another parent stood up and then they got together and stood up. And, you know, now it's the norm that we keep them at home for as long as possible, you know, as long as we can possibly do it, as long as that's the best decision for their care. So just keep that in mind. Don't necessarily accept the status quo because that's what it is and that's what it's always been. If you guys think that something's wrong, especially if more than a few of you think something is wrong, it's probably wrong. And it probably needs to be changed. And not everybody can make their life, you know, every spare second in their life about being an advocate. But you guys, if you band together, you'll find that, you know, everybody has a half hour a month they can spend. And if you add up those half hours, you know, you get one really strong campaign to get things changed. So self-education is one of the best ways to empower yourself. You know, you find out that you have a special needs kid, and if you didn't have any warning, you know, it's one of the biggest reasons that I advocate to people. You know, I'll have friends that don't get the prenatal testing done, and they're like, oh, well, it wouldn't change my mind either way. And I'm like, but if you know that something's wrong, you can read 19 books, you know, before you ever get to the point that you have to make a life-altering decision. I mean, I wish I had advance notice because my son had this massive stroke and they're coming in and they're like, so we want to do this angiogram, we put a tube in his thigh and we run it up through all of his veins and it goes into his brain and it's extremely painful, but we really think we need to do it. Is it okay? You know, or we want to put a G-tube in. Okay. Because I didn't know anything. And so the first book, one of the parents to me at Ronald McDonald House, and they had a lending library, which I'm very, very thankful for because I wouldn't have been able to afford the $16 book at that point in time. But I read Cerebral Palsy, A Parent's Guide. And there was just all this stuff in there that I had no idea about. And you know, I learned what the different tests were, and what the different, you know, things they may want to do or what questions to ask and things along those lines. And like I said, you know, it's instinct to just trust the doctors. The doctors must be right, but the doctors aren't always right because here's the thing. The doctors know cerebral palsy or autism or Down, they know the condition better than you do, hands down. I don't know what area of, you know, what each area of the brain is, but I knew CJ's cerebral palsy better than any of them ever would. And so that's kind of, you know, I encourage everybody to try and find the marriage of, you know, you don't know everything about the condition that your child has. But you do know everything about your child's version of that condition. So don't be afraid to educate yourself on the general condition. Don't be afraid to educate yourself and speak up for yourself. Because by educating yourself, that lets you know, it lets you have some secureness in being able to speak up and say, you know, no, I don't think that's right. And when the doctor looks at you and goes, well, what makes you think that's not right? You can repeat like this whole thing that you read in a paragraph the night before, you know, to help justify your opinions. And as far as self-education goes in the advocacy space, it's the same thing. You know, learn what your rights are. That's what these organizations are here for. You know, my current husband, he had said to me, you know, when I told him I was coming here, and he goes, well, what's a parent advocate group? And I said, you know, they kind of tell you what your rights are. Like, you just you're getting the doctors and the school system and the therapists, and everybody's just trying to shove you down this one-size-fits-all funnel. I said, and what they tell you is they explain to you what your rights are and what you do have the choices to do, what you don't have the choices to do, and maybe the workarounds to things that aren't fair, etc. when it comes to the system. And I was very thankful for that when my son was growing up. And so just make sure that you guys take advantage of the education that the advocacy groups provide you with too. If you don't like a therapist, you don't have to keep that therapist. If you disagree with a course of treatment, you have the right to speak up and say you disagree with it. If you just want to question it, you can question it. When my son was in the hospital, they would do this thing where the doctor would do his rounds at like 5:15 in the morning, and I think he did it to avoid having to speak to all the parents. And so I would sleep in the chair. I would get up and come in at 4:45. I used to come in at 5, but then he started his rounds a tiny bit earlier. So I would get up and I would sleep in a chair. Don't let anybody tell you that, or don't let anybody make you feel like they can ignore you or that they don't have to answer your questions. And that's what these groups are getting together to try and teach you, is that, you have control of the steering wheel. There's a lot of obstacles in your path that you have no control over, but you do have control of the steering wheel, and they're going to let you know what the obstacles are before you hit them, so you can kind of have a plan on what you're going to do when you do hit them. This is a quote by a business guy named Jim Rohn. It says, "You are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with." And that to me has been true in every aspect of my life. People can either build you up or they can drag you down. And it's very important to surround yourself with the type of people that are going to build you up. For me, as a parent of a special needs child, I wanted to surround myself with people that didn't think it was the end of the world, that were kind of looking at the future and moving forward, because they made me feel like I could do it. You want to make sure that you're surrounding yourself in every aspect with people that are going to tell you you can keep moving forward. I got married very young. My ex-husband's actually a good guy, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I got married really, really young. And just, we weren't adults yet. And we grew into adults, and it was like, wow, we really wouldn't even be friends if we met today. So we got to the point where, we were arguing a lot, and I don't know about you guys, but the first thing they told me in the hospital after they diagnosed my son was, the doom and gloom of like something like 80% of people in your situation will be divorced in 5 years. And I'm like, well, thanks for that sunshine of cheer, on a crappy day. But we hit the point where we were arguing, and it was just like, we just didn't think, and I will never forget. And I come from a very small family. This does not make my family, bad people. And she said this out of genuine worry, but I'll never forget that my aunt looked at me and said, you can't break up with him. I mean, he stayed. Most guys would stay. Nobody's gonna want to be with you. And at that point I had 3 kids. And so she's like, nobody's gonna want to be with you with 3 kids with all the problems that he has. I stayed in a marriage that I knew I should have gotten out of for another 1.5 years after that, because you don't realize how influential what people say around you, like what the people around you say, actually is to your life. So just make sure you realize that. I'm not saying that you can't talk to, your BFF from high school because, she thinks your son's just gonna grow out of it in 4 years. I'm just saying that may not be the person that you wanna talk to for 3 hours a day, every day. So make sure that you surround yourself with people that, either have been where you've been and they're surviving, and not only surviving, but thriving, and people that emotionally are going to build you up and let you know that you've got this. So we get to tomorrow may not always come. And this is where I give my ex-husband a lot of credit. When CJ turned, he was 11, almost 12, I couldn't lift him anymore. He was a 70-pound bag of kitty litter as far as how heavy he was, because he didn't help at all. And I'd blown out my knee 3 times in 3 months from lifting him, and the doctors finally said to me, "You're not capable of doing this anymore. He's too big, you can't lift him." And they also started in on the what if I dropped him because he was so heavy. The concern wasn't even just for me and my physical health, but also him and his physical health. And so they started talking about trying to place him somewhere, and we knew that day would eventually come. But my ex-husband is a construction worker. The guy is built, even now, at our ages. And he didn't have the money to take him, but he had the physical ability to lift him. So I had to let my son go live with my ex-husband, and we lived in different states. And that was unequivocally the second hardest thing that I ever had to do, was admit that I wasn't the best situation for him anymore. I took some solace in the fact that we hadn't had to place him yet, and that he was able to go with my ex-husband. And I give him a lot of credit because, like I said, one of the first things counselors, message of cheer, one of the first things they'll tell you is, a lot of guys won't stick around in that situation. A lot of them, so I applaud the guys that are in here, because as much as, it sucks for that to be the statistic, that is the statistic. A lot of guys will find the first door labeled exit and run as fast as they can. So I give him a lot of credit that he was a fantastic father, and if anything, he was better with CJ, when it came to all 3 children. And so I had another son, a 4th child. That was a surprise. And he had never met CJ because CJ was already in Florida. My other kids went to go visit their dad during the summers, so they got to spend time with him, and I flew out every couple of months to see him. But my youngest son had yet to meet his brother. And things were just busy. It was like we had him, and then I was all backed up on work because I had just had the baby and I hadn't been able to travel for a year, so I needed to do conferences. And there was just all this stuff that needed to be done, and we were going to get to it. And so we planned the trip for over Christmas break in 2012, and then CJ passed away in November of 2012. And regret is not a dish that is swallowed easily. And I say that because don't be afraid to speak up about your child's medical care, about advocacy, about anything. Like, don't be afraid to do what you think is right, because you may not get a second chance to correct it. For me, it was, I kicked myself every day that it was like, no matter what was going on, I should have never taken the guarantee that he was still going to be there 6 months later for us to get there. And so, I always tell people there are 3 things we're guaranteed in life, and that's death, taxes, and right now. And to me, right now is when you guys kind of need to go, okay, I can do this, I can move forward, I'm going to start speaking my mind more, I'm going to start fighting more. If something in my gut tells me it's wrong, then it's probably wrong, and if I don't know what to do, I'm going to reach out to 20 other parents that have been in my spot before that'll probably have advice for me, or to the advocacy organizations around me that can tell me the best way to try and move forward. And I may not always win, but at the end of the day, I will be able to look back and go, but I always fought. And so to me, that is important. I've learned how bad regret tastes, and I just hope that nobody in this room has to learn how bad it tastes. Mine was a little bit different of an extreme scenario due to geographic issues. But you can have that same type of regret with anything. So just make sure, like I said, you guys may not always win, but you want to look back and say you always did everything you could. And then number 2 is your biggest setback can either break you or fuel you. It's up to you. And so the first thing I want to say, which everybody in here I'm sure knows this, but it's something that I explain to other people. It never fails that when I do a speech on this topic, I'll get people that come up to me afterwards and they're like, I have some problems, but they're nowhere near as bad as yours. I feel guilty for even thinking of mine as problems. And I'm like, this is not a competition. It's not like, the person with the worst problems gets a trophy. I may have it worse, my son may have it worse than some of the other kids that are represented by their parents in this room right now. And some of your kids have had it worse than my son. It's not a competition for, and like I said, when we first thought it was just seizures, we hadn't been on the other side of the fence. Like we hadn't been in Worstville yet. So that was a huge challenge for us. So I think that for me, it doesn't matter what the setback is. You have, we discussed this before, you have a choice as far as what you're going to do with it. And you don't want to let it break you, because life is going to continue to throw you challenges. And as much as I wish I didn't have the challenges that I had, there's not a single person in this room that wouldn't trade places with their child or gladly jump in front of a train if it would reverse time and mean that their child never had to go through any of this. I'm not necessarily saying that this is like a bonus. I'm just saying that, once you accept that that's what it is, every one of these challenges is going to teach you something. It's either going to make you stronger, it might be preparing you for something that you don't even know is going to come yet. And it's one of those things that when life knocks you down, you have to decide and get back up and ask it if that's all it's got. Or originally that slide usually says, tell it hits like a, but yeah, it hits, because life's answer is always going to be no. that it's got more for you. And if you let it break you on the first challenge that it gives you, or on the second challenge that it gives you, you're never going to hit that third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And I'm not saying that I look forward to the challenges, but I can look back at the past ones and say I've learned something from every one of them, or that I eventually found the domino effect or the ripple effect of why that in particular happened to me. So I mentioned that I had a fourth child, right? And so that's my son Thomas. And 8 months ago, 6 months after my son passed away, we went in for a doctor's visit, and the doctor says, he doesn't make a lot of eye contact and he's not talking. He goes, I'm going to send you to a neurologist. And so we went to the neurologist, and by that point, we knew they were suspecting autism. And at first when they told me that, it's amazing that I think, people from the outside world, you ever hear somebody like, I lived in Canada for a long time, and so like I'll tell somebody that I live in Toronto, and they'll be like, oh, do you know so-and-so? And I'm like, it's a big country, man. Like, just because I live in Canada, it's not a little community. And I think a lot of people assume that, if you're a special needs parent, then you know everything there is to know about, all the major different disabilities, and you don't. You kind of like specialize in your child's. And so when they first said autism, I was thinking, there's no way. Because what they portray on TV is, the kid that doesn't want to be touched and doesn't want anybody near him. And my son's actually really social. And then I went home and I started reading the I don't want to call it a symptom list, but I can't think of a better way to describe it, that were put out there by other parents, by the way. Not by doctors, that just parents who were like, hey, the book says they don't do this, but there's 32 kids, in this forum saying that they do this. And I remember reading the list and going, oh, crap. Because, he was everything on the list. And I remember looking at my then husband, because here's the thing, I had been through this before. My current husband had not. And so I kind of looked at him, and I was trying to talk to him like hey, so I was reading up, I don't think we're going to get good news. And, he very much, until the doctor, said something, he was not even going to talk about it. And I'm thinking like, you're going to get hit in the face by a 2x4. I know how it feels when you walk in there and you're not expecting it. We went into the neurologist, and the neurologist did a few different tests, and the neurologist asked me, because my son still to this day doesn't sleep through the night, he's almost 3. And so the doctor had asked us if he slept through the night, and I said no, and my husband goes, oh, he sleeps through the night sometimes, like at least 2 nights a week. And I turn around and I look at the doctor, and I'm like, he doesn't sleep through the night. And the doctor was asking us questions, and this is my husband's first child, so my husband thinks, like that all of this is normal, the fact that my son, and you have those well-meaning people around too, and like, they mean well, but I had a bunch of people that after we got the diagnosis, my dad included, that would look at my husband and go, oh, her Uncle Stephen was just like that. He didn't talk until he was 4 and he's fine now. And I'm thinking, you're not helping. Like, you're really not helping this acceptance situation. And so it was kind of like, so the neurologist looks at us and he says, he's really young. to officially diagnose. He was less than 1 month past his second birthday. He goes, but I'm gonna diagnose him. He goes, I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. And he actually whispered it at me like that. And so, you know, we got the diagnosis, and I'll be completely honest with you. It was like, what was I, like a mass murderer in my past life? Like, are you kidding me? And I talked with a few of the parents in here last night, and you know, it's one of those things that it's just like, you know, there are plenty of you in here that have more than one child with a special need, and it was just like, you know, I hadn't been in that situation until 8 months ago, and it was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And so it's one of those things that now I know that there was even more reason behind all the challenges I've had to go through with CJ, because I know what I'm doing now. Like this time I actually have some clue as to what's going on. You know, I went in for he's 2.5 now, so they're getting him ready for the transfer into the school system. And I went in, you know, we're doing the IEP, and they're explaining to me the whole process, and I'm thinking, I don't mean to be rude, but I got this. Can we just, you know, cut to the actual plan? And I think that one of the things that I was very lucky to be able to take away from this was just feeling more confident in it this time, because I've learned all these lessons now, and I still have to remind myself of all these lessons. You know, I want to say it's not any easier to hear it the second time than it is to hear it the first time. You feel a bit more prepared, but it's not any easier. And like I tell people, CJ was very severely multiply handicapped. They believe Thomas will be high functioning in spite of the autism. And you know, when I had CJ, and you would do, like, you know, the parent support groups, etc., and you would see the other struggles that parents would go through. And you know, with CJ, there was really no argument with the IEP. He qualified for everything. There was no argument on, you know, what services he was going to get. And I used to discuss with a few other parents that it was like, my son didn't know people made fun of him. You know, I didn't know what was harder. Was it harder to have a child that didn't know you were his mother, like that knew your voice was familiar, but didn't know you were his mother, but lived in bliss, the bliss of not knowing how much of a jackass the outside world could be to them if it chose to be, or whether having a child that was higher functioning but was fully aware of all the challenges that they were facing, like on a level to understand that these were sucky challenges. You know, and now I'm going to find out. I think, you know, I'm going to find out. I'm going to see both ends of the spectrum. But I do thank my son for preparing me for this. And that gets me to the last point, which is you can survive anything. Whether or not it was the special needs diagnosis in the beginning, or whether it was just, you know, the 13th hospital visit and you lost your job because you couldn't show up responsibly. I think everybody hits a point where they just feel like, I'm gonna die. There's just no way that I'm going to survive this. Life is never gonna be better. Life is always going to suck. And there's no way I'm gonna get through this. And you know, I thought that when they diagnosed my son. I thought that when he passed away. And I thought that when for a fleeting second, even though I know this lesson, you know, for a fleeting second, it felt like that when my youngest son was diagnosed. But you know, the bottom line is that you will survive it. And believe it or not, it won't hurt as much every single day that goes by. I explain to people that when you have a child that becomes, you know, at least in my case, severely multiply handicapped, it's almost like you lost one child and then you were handed another. You lost the child that you imagined, or in some cases, kids are older, you know. So I had a girlfriend whose daughter got leukemia at 14. This kid was on a basketball court 1 month and she was gone 12 months later. And so it's kind of like, you know, you hit these situations where it hurts and you don't think you're gonna make it, but you will. And as time goes by, it'll get better and you'll start to see more of the positive and less of the negative. And I'm not saying that there won't be days that you just throw up your hands. or days, you know, for me, it's kind of like, I'll look at my kids and be like, nobody talk to mommy right now. Mommy's going out back. Y'all are staying in here. But, you know, you will be able to survive it. And just keep that in mind. Now, there's a phrase that says, life doesn't give you more than you can handle. I don't know about y'all, but I hate that phrase. And I tell people, when I do this speech to people who don't have special needs kids, I'm like, if you know a parent of a special needs, we hate that phrase. This is not an award. We were not, you know, like handpicked, you know, because we were awesome. And it's kind of like, you know, I hate this phrase, but everybody says it all the time, right? And I saw this on the internet, I can't take credit for it, but it said, apparently life thinks I'm a badass right underneath of it. You know, and my goal is to every day prove it right, that not only am I a badass, and whatever you throw at me, I'm not only going to get through, but I'm going to make life better for other people that have to go through it. But whatever you throw at my child's gonna kick your ass too. Because I'm not gonna let life put him into a position where he isn't able to contribute something to the world. So this is, you know, I've always said that my son is and always will be my hero. He is absolutely the bravest person that I've ever known and has contributed more good to this world than I will ever be able to hope to do. And I just want you guys to all remember too, when you look at your kids, that, you know, I don't know about the rest of you, but I would imagine a lot of you look at your kids and think they are your heroes because they handle things on a day-to-day basis that most adults would curl up in a ball and cry over. And, you know, our job is just to get them through their journey as best as possible. And that if things don't work out the way that we would want them to try and make sure that we use their life as a platform to make the world better. So that's all I have, and thank you very much.